Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First of all, I just want to thank the Muslims for Peace organization for inviting me here and for having me at this gathering. As I was thinking about the theme of tonight's event, the idea of interfaith solidarity, particularly as it relates to social justice, I kept thinking about what is it that binds all religions in the world together. And so when it comes to times of division, of times of injustice, of times of conflict, what is it that members of different faith groups think about? And the one word that stood out to me is the word that this organization is founded on, and that's the word of peace. Whether we say peace, or salam, or shalom, or shanti, the ideal of peace is something that is universal across all religions. And it's a reminder for all of us that justice is a universal principle, and it's something that all religious traditions call for us to uphold. And I don't want to just talk about this in a theoretical sense. And I want to talk about this historically from thousands of years ago. But even in recent history, there are so many examples of religions coming together, people of faith coming together to promote justice and to promote peace. One example I wanted to talk about was in Nigeria. In Nigeria, there's sectarian violence that occurs, and often Muslims will form human chains around churches to protect the worshipers during Christmas, to prevent sectarian violence. And as I thought about that, I thought about how even in modern days, I was at an encampment at George Washington University this past year, and I remember Christian and Jewish brothers and sisters standing around us during the Jummah prayer to protect us in terms of doxing and other things that were happening on college campuses. In Egypt, churches that are burned, there are Muslims that step up in efforts to rebuild them, because they understand that an attack on one faith is an attack on all of us. And also in terms of the Holocaust, I don't know how many people know about the history of Muslims and Jews during the Holocaust, but I just wanted to cite a couple of examples of how powerful interfaith action can be during massive tragedies. The Grand Mosque of Paris sheltered Jewish families during the Holocaust and provided them with false Muslim identities to allow them to escape from the Nazis. In Albania, a Muslim-majority country, thousands of Jewish refugees were protected under the National Code of Besa, which translates to keeping the promise, because Albanians, both Christians and Muslims, risked their lives to shelter and protect the Jews. The King of Morocco, Mohammed V, refused to comply with orders from the Nazi government to hand over his Jewish subjects, stating, "We have no Jews in Morocco, only Moroccans." And it was a duty that he felt, this moral duty, that extended beyond just his immediate community, as a responsibility to stand up for dignity and safety of others, regardless of their faith. I think about in 2019 in Christchurch in New Zealand, where dozens of Muslims were massacred in a terrorist attack by right-wing extremists who held Islamophobic views. And it was Christian and Jewish communities that helped and supported the Muslims in that area. They also formed human chains after every single prayer for over 2 weeks to help restore a sense of security to Muslims so that they could pray. And most of all, I don't think we can talk about interfaith solidarity and social justice without talking about what's happening in Gaza. You know, when I think about what's happening in Gaza, of course, it's an issue that I know was central to Muslims, but there were so many other faith leaders who stepped up and spoke out about this issue. I think about thousands of ministers from Atlanta who penned a letter in the New York Times calling for a ceasefire. I think about the Pope who spoke out and called for an end to the hostilities. I think about the fact that in Bethlehem, the place of Jesus' birth, that's in the West Bank, they did not celebrate Christmas because of what was happening in Gaza. The birthplace of Jesus Christ, a symbol of peace and hope, was unable to celebrate its most sacred holiday because of a war. And if that does not move us to action, what will? You know, in the Islamic tradition, there's a verse in the Quran that I know many of you may be familiar with. And it's a verse that talks about how faith for us is not a passive action. To be Muslim is not a passive religion. It is actually a faith of action. And I think this verse really encapsulates it. This is Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 135, "O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice, as witnesses to Allah, even though it may be against yourselves, your parents, or your kin." It's a verse that reminds us that justice is not just a convenience, it's an obligation. We do not just pursue something when it benefits us, but we uphold it even when it's difficult, even when it requires us to challenge our own assumptions, our own communities, and our own positions of power. Likewise, in the Bible, it states, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute." That's Proverbs 31:8. And in the Torah, it teaches, "Do not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Exodus 23:9. These shared principles across all our sacred texts reinforce what we already know, that justice is not bound by religion, but rather faith as a means to achieving justice. And so I want to just talk very briefly about what we can do, especially as we're gathered here in this time. What are the things that we can do as we stand in interfaith? We can engage in dialogue. I think it's so important for us to build bonds with people who are different than us, people who come from different backgrounds. We can advocate for justice. Again, this is something that's compelled upon us by all of our faiths and all of our teachings. We can build coalitions across different backgrounds and support interfaith organizations that are working towards peace and reconciliation. And we can challenge bigotry wherever we see it. Whether it's Islamophobia, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's people talking about the Christian faith, these are all forms of discrimination. They all stem from the same root of hatred. And so, my friends, if we truly believe in justice, then we must recognize that we cannot be selective. If we truly believe in peace, then we must be willing to work for it, across faiths, across borders, and across differences. Let us walk away from today's gathering with more just an inspiration. Let's walk away with conviction. Let us build a movement that transcends division, that fights for peace with the full force of our faiths, and that reminds us that when we stand together, we can create change. Thank you, and may our collective efforts bring about a more peaceful and just world.